Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Spirit Plant Medicine Presents. My name is Marc Caron, and I'm happy to share that today we're having a great conversation with a great group of guests in regards to Stephen Gray's new book, How Psychedelics Can Help Save the World. And today we're going to answer the question, what is the role of psychedelics for a planet in transition? So our first guest I'll introduce is my friend and cohort in the spirit plant medicine space, Mr. Stephen Gray. Stephen has been traveling the spiritual and medicine path for over 50 years now. He's a writer, educator, conference organizer, speaker, and he's also a facilitator for cannabis ceremonies. Now, Stephen is the author of 3 books, including the popular Cannabis and Spirituality, An Explorer's Guide to the Ancient Plant Spirit Allies. And just recently, as I just already mentioned, How Psychedelics Can Help Save the World, Visionary and Indigenous Voices Speak Out. Stephen, always a pleasure to see you.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah, looking forward to our conversation today. And we also have joining us is Belinda Eriacho. I hope I pronounced her last name right. Eriacho. And she's of Diné, Navajo, and Ashiwi of the Pueblo Zuni descent. Her maternal clan is the One Who Walks Around, and she was born for the Zuni Pueblo people. Belinda was born and raised in the Navajo Reservation located in Arizona in the United States. She's a wisdom carrier, healer, and founder of Kalaji, and she's focused on culture and traditional teachings that impact topics such as Native American communities. She holds a health degrees, technology and public health. Belinda's just well-rounded in so many different areas, and she brings great wisdom to our community. So we're excited to have you here again today, Belinda. Nice to see you.
Great to see you.
Awesome. And of course, we have Chris Bache. Chris Bache is a professor emeritus in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Youngstown State University, where he's taught for 33 years. He's also adjunct faculty at the California Institute of Integral Studies and a fellow at the Institute of Noetic Sciences. He's an award-winning teacher with his work exploring the philosophical implications of non-ordinary states of consciousness. Chris has written a number of books, and his most recent is LSD and the Minds of the Universe. Great read. If you haven't read it, go check out that book. It's fantastic. Welcome, Chris. How are you?
I'm great. Welcome, everybody. It's a real honor to be here with you today.
Yeah, likewise. It's always a pleasure to connect and learn from you folks, because for me, this work is really been a passion of learning, and the things that I've gleaned from all the talks over the conferences of the years has really made a difference in my life, and it's really exciting to be able to share that with people around the world. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us here. And we're going to get started, and I'm going to start with Stephen. Basically what we're going to do today is I'm going to ask a question of our panel, and they're all each going to answer for about 5 minutes or so the answer to this one specific question. And because we're focusing on the book, How Psychedelics Can Help Save the World, I'm going to start with Stephen Gray, because he was the guy who put this work together, and we're going to start there. So if we're ready, gang, let's roll. The question is, in your view, Mr. Stephen Gray, what is the role of psychedelics for a planet in transition?
Oh, thanks, Mark. Thanks for the intro and the lead in. And just a quick clarification, by the way, although you implied it in your latest little statement there, I am merely the editor and one of the contributors to both the previous cannabis book and this one. And in this case, there are 25 contributors. So I just wrote the intro and the outro, as it were, and a couple of other short things. So that's my role. Just wanted to clarify that. And the rest of it was cat herding for the other 25 people involved. But I'm delighted with the results. They're all remarkable people, and they're all speaking in different ways, but I would say in accord. I don't think there would be anything in the book that would provoke any one of those contributors to disagree with any of the other contributors. So obviously that's a big question, and I actually think that I'm actually more interested in what Chris and Belinda have to say about it than what I have to say about it, to be honest. So what could I say about that issue? Well,
Well, Stephen,
okay, I have an answer for you, but go ahead, Mark. Yeah.
what I was going to say is maybe you can let us know what inspired you to put this particular book together and what that inspiration was for you based
Right.
on the title
Yeah.
of it, right?
Okay, well, I'm going to take that question and run down the field, maybe the opposite direction, but we'll see. Excuse me. So, yeah, well, the inspiration is the potential of psychedelics, which is answering your question anyway, I hope. Here's one way of talking about it, the role of psychedelics for a planet in transition. They are not silver bullets or magic bullets. They are fraught with the potential for misuse, misappropriation, misunderstanding, and in some cases harm. They're not for everybody. And in fact, Jamie Wheel, who's spoken at our conference twice, had an interesting kind of template that he suggested. He said, don't take it too literally, but perhaps it might be like this. If you take a graph of 100% of the demographic of the people, perhaps there's 10% of those people at one end of the continuum should never take psychedelics for a variety of reasons, mental health, fragility, etc. And then there are 10% at the other end who are the dedicated, serious psychonauts and explorers who are constantly learning from these medicines. And so those people might be taking the medicines frequently over, accumulated number of years. And then there are 80% in the middle who, in Jamie's view, perhaps should only be taking the psychedelics for very special occasions, perhaps 3 or 4 times in their lives. For like a graduation, a wedding, the birth of a first child, something like that. So that's just one way of looking at, who might benefit or not from the psychedelics. Having said that, my other sort of favorite way to talk about these or put them into the context of our current situation is that there's an obvious notion that using the more sort of a medical metaphor, that when the patient is in an advanced state of illness, strong medicines are required. So as obviously all 4 of us here understand quite clearly, we are in a dire condition on the planet. And as Chris Bache has made so clear in his books and talks and different things like that, we are heading into, sorry to steal your thunder here, Chris, but a death rebirth cycle, which is most likely to become increasingly more difficult on the material level over the next decades. We don't know how long. So things are, we're in a crucial moment. We're in a crucial nexus moment. So what we need, as I understand it, is we need tools that can almost in a sense shock the monkey or wake us up, do a lot of healing work and awakening work. So in that regard, the way that I like to think of the psychedelics is as reality medicines. They're not about escaping into some alternative reality particularly, although that's a fraught, thing to say, I suppose. But ultimately, what they're capable of when they're done in the most skillful, intentional circumstances, I think, is they can open us up into understandings which are real, about who we are, the nature of things. And that includes another way that I like to talk about them as well is I think of psychedelics as having sort of 2 interwoven capabilities. One is that they are truth serums potentially. So they can show us things about ourselves so that we can see where we are blocked, where the obstacles are. We can see sometimes into our past and the places we've got stuck or turned away from ourselves, as Gabor Mate might say. And then the other side of that, it's part of the same function, of course, and as I say, interwoven, is that they can ideally open us up to what my old Buddhist teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, would call unconditioned reality, the awakened state to some degree or another. And as people that take psychedelics often say, these states often feel more real than the ones that most people live through most of the time. So I think I'll stop there.
Well, thank you, Stephen. So before we get into any kind of conversation, I'm going to pass it to Belinda from her perspective and her worldview, to answer really the same question. What do you feel is the role of psychedelics for our planet in transition? Belinda.
Thank you, Mark. Before I get started, I do want to do a land acknowledgement to the people of the Phoenix area, which are the Otam, the Peeposh, the Fort McDowell Yavapai Nation, and the Auction people who live in this place that they refer to as Earth Doctor. I'm here as an invited guest in these unceded territories, and I share a common history with them, and I wanted to acknowledge them in that way. Before I answer that question, that's a loaded question, Mark. I, in my chapter 5, that talks about turning of the soil, I use that as a metaphor for what is unfolding in this time that we are in right now. And to me, the way that I look at psychedelics, I view them more as sacred medicines, not necessarily psychedelics or entheogens or drugs, as many people refer to them. And I think that really puts in perspective itself the language that we use when we refer to these sacred medicines. Everything that we do, we create energy or we transform energy. And it's really important that we clearly understand them and respect them, as my friend Stephen had indicated. But I think also psychedelics is really an opportunity to awaken to ourselves. I was reading some literature the other day about the intellectual quotient and the spiritual quotient, just, on a global level for humanity and kind of where we are. And it seems that we've outgrown our intellectual selves, and now the spiritual piece, the spiritual aspect of ourselves is starting to unfold. And when my metaphor that I talk about, the turning of the soil, what I believe is happening with the psychedelics is essentially turning ourselves inside out. We're so used to being out in the material world from a Western perspective that we've forgotten how to even be with ourselves. And so by unfolding and taking these different medicines, it allows us to go into these places that we can eventually heal ourselves and then resonate that out into our families and our communities. I also believe that psychedelic medicines or sacred medicines meet different aspects in our lives. My culture, we talk about the cycles of life. When we are born into this physicalness, we come in a spirit physical form. And it is not until we make our first lap that we embody the physicalness as human beings. And then we go through adolescence, adulthood, elderlyhood, and then we return back to source. And I think through those experiences, we go through a path that I refer to as Hojon, which means the balance of harmony in our lives. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that everything is nice and rosy. Life is life, and sometimes those difficult experiences that we go through allow us to unfold and to see things in a different perspective, but also give us some life lessons that we need to learn. And so with that, I think one of the things is that in my book, I also make reference to the prophecies of the eagle and condor. And I give 2 examples. One is from the Hopi people, which are located here in Arizona, as well as the Andean traditions. And that the people of the North are the people of the mind, and the people of the South are the people of the heart. And when we can come together as one unified community, then we can start to heal the history that we all share. And so I think psychedelics allows us to get to that point, but also come to a lot of other realizations about our interconnectedness with one another. the importance of ceremony and intention that come along with these sacred plant medicines, but also the realization of going to a much deeper level in our healing evolution, if you will. I think a lot of times when we have an illness, we rely on Western medicine for that healing aspect rather than going to that next level deeper within. And so those are just some of my thoughts in the way that I view psychedelics and how it can save the world.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And I just
Absolutely.
want to let people know that if you want to catch Belinda's talk from our Spirit Plant Medicine Conference in 2022, which is titled Turning of the Soil, that's available on our YouTube channel. And it's also available for free in our membership portal as well at spiritplantmedicine.com. I highly recommend going and taking that in because it was just a fantastic presentation. And as we move forward, we're going to go to Mr. Chris Bache. Chris, again, the question is, in your view, what do you feel is the role of psychedelics for our planet in transition?
Well, first, Mark, I want to affirm everything that Stephen and Belinda have said. One of the advantages of going last in the batting order is I get to play off of what has already been said, and I certainly absolutely agree with it. It seems that we are living in a different time in history, as particularly Belinda has pointed to. We're living in a time when the underlying structure of the collective psyche is shifting. We are shifting culturally. There are so many cultural migrations and integrations taking place, but kind of at a deep level, the very nature of the collective psyche seems to be simmering, turning to the point of boiling. One of the ways I understand this is that we have entered a time when the karma of our many, many former lives, all of us collectively, is coming forward and pressing up inside us, seeking resolution. I think there's a tremendous collective purification taking place in the outer world and also in the inner world. So one of the uses of psychedelics that can be very helpful is to help accelerate and deepen and clarify this internal purification process. I think that's why so many people are involved in other spiritual practices besides psychedelic practice of yoga and meditation, so many different activities, because we need to keep the psyche open and clear to let this negative conditioning come through us without re-traumatizing ourselves, to help our system clear itself and cleanse itself. And psychedelics, when used conscientiously in ritual context and in therapeutic context, can deepen and accelerate this healing process. And I think one of the fundamental problems that we have been living with is our separation from nature and our separation from our spiritual nature, so that the surface of our nature is not as naturally in tune with our deeper nature as maybe it had been in earlier times, simpler times. So part of healing the psyche is also sort of healing the soul at a deeper level than just kind of personal therapeutic healing, helping the soul enter into deeper communion with its own deep history and with the deep history of the planet and with the deep history of the intelligence that has been orchestrating reality and manifesting reality for 13.7 billion years. So that in addition to taking the healing process deeper than just personal healing, even deeper than collective healing, it's can be a process of reconnecting with that core intelligence that is manifesting life, manifesting nature, and manifesting history, and learning from it, developing a deeper understanding from life itself. What is happening? What is taking place? Why is this century different from earlier centuries? What is the trajectory of our evolutionary project, excuse me, in this century? So healing, facilitating a kind of cultural renaissance but then also facilitating a deeper psycho-spiritual renaissance so that we can reconnect with this core sense, this deeper understanding of what's actually taking place in history. So those are the points that I would just add to what's already been said.
It's fantastic, and I look forward to, as we go through, about what transition we're facing. But I wanted to just take this moment as we go into, the next question, so we can unpack this a little bit more. Belinda, you said something really, I think, important and profound that we all need to, take a look at and understand. And this is mostly, kind of my perception and something that I've been picking up, because you talked about the language and how we talk about psychedelics, entheogens, drugs, plant medicines and things. And, I've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of people in terms of interviews and, media and things, and everybody talks about them as drugs. And I just want to share my thought on this, because when we take a look at a natural plant and a plant medicine, whether it's cannabis, the mushroom, ayahuasca, and things of that nature, in my opinion, they're not drugs, they're plants, and plants as medicine. And when we take a look at, other plants that we consume on a regular basis, we don't call them drugs. Broccoli, we don't call a drug. Celery, we don't call a drug. All those power foods and power greens, we don't call a drug, yet they have different plant properties. And when we look at, the psychedelic nature of plants, they have different plant properties. And that's why I think it's really important that we don't classify them in that stigma of being a drug, and that we use all plants as medicine. And it's just my 2 cents on that, because it comes up a lot where people will call them drugs. And in my opinion, they're really plants, right? And many of them have their own medicine, whether it's a vegetable or something with psychedelic psychoactive properties. So
I think there's one thing that's missing from that, Mark. And I too have been talking with many people, and I think one of the things that seems to be missing is the relationship between us and the plants and the plant kingdom. From my culture, I refer to ayahuasca as grandmother, translates to grandmother ayahuasca. These are ancient teachers that really have something to pass on to us if we're willing to listen and to open up to those, gems of wisdom. The same thing goes with the mushroom kingdom. They're not called Santo Nino for no reason at all, the holy children, and so I think it really is important that for those of us that use psychedelics, whether it's in our healing or as therapeutic modalities, is we really need to come to that understanding, not understanding. We're not putting ourselves over these plants. We're really internalizing that and really building that relationship with them. And I think it's really important as this, this whole field starts to develop. So thank you for that, Mark.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that word, inner standing. I hope to use that in the future, if you don't mind.
Yes, please do. Please do.
Awesome.
Not copyrighted. Yeah.
Fantastic. But it's just, it makes sense. An inner standing is very different than an intellectual understanding.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, beautifully said. So now the question is, what is the transition you think that we're facing? There's a lot of change in the world right now. We're seeing it every day. Stephen, what do you think is, the biggest part of this transition that we're facing? What is it?
Well, yeah. Well, again, not to belittle my own intelligence, but I think Chris Bache has been tapping into what I think, if I may say so, Chris, I think it's more or less the correct terminology, that the vast intelligences of the universe that have been saying that, as Chris has said before numerous times, we've reached this kind of nexus point. And so I think it's just really important now. Okay, so yeah, here's a good way to talk about that, I think. As if we think it will, and seems to be apparently underway already, the stability of the past, or the status quo, such as it is or was, is becoming less viable, less comfortable on the material level, and just in general, change is happening very, very quickly on multiple levels. As that happens, and especially if things become, well, either rapidly or not quite so rapidly, more difficult for many people on the material level, like if there become shortages of food or clean water, if international agreements break down, if the climate makes us put like a much greater percentage of our financial resources into climate change mitigation, and on and on. If those things all make our lives more difficult and less stable and less certain, I guess you could say, what I think is likely to happen, and I mean, I'm not an authority any more than anyone else, but it seems to me that a lot of it's already happening in terms of its effect on the psychology or the mentality of people. You keep hearing in the news about how there's more depression these days. There's more anxiety. So I think what's likely to happen if this trajectory unfolds the way we envision it, the way we think it will, or perhaps the way the spirits are telling some people that it is likely to, there will be more of those problematic mind states and more discouragement. So I think it's really important, and I'm saying this partly because that's the mission of the book, is to hopefully give people, as Dwayne Elgin, one of the contributors to the book, says, a believable story. A story that's, if I had it in front of me, actually I could find it in a minute, but I don't want to make you wait. In his chapter in the book, he lays out sort of, if the story is going to be functional for people, it has to have 4 elements, and I don't remember what they all are now, but one is that it has to be simple, easy to understand, functional, able to be, put into place, manifested, plausible, etc. So Dwayne has a really interesting view of this from my point of view. He talks about how in his book Choosing Earth, he actually goes through a possible or even probable scenario for the next 6-7 decades. And this is super loose, and I haven't even read it for a while, so it's something vaguely like this. It looks like material conditions are likely to continue to deteriorate over the next several decades. But this is really key. If enough people get smart, or however you want to say that, wake up, do the healing work that they need to do, we need to do, so that we can participate in intelligent, creative solutions at multiple levels, whatever level that is, through the arts, through government, through economics, whatever, environmental work, et cetera, but starting with that inner understanding, or that inner standing that Belinda and now you are talking about, Marc, then there is the hope of, as Dwayne calls it, the birth or the arising of a mature planetary civilization. So and Chris, again, if you don't mind my stealing your thunder, Chris has said that he wasn't given any timeline on this. Dwayne lays it out over the next 6 or 7 decades as a possibility. So what I'm really trying to say in a somewhat rambly way here is that I feel strongly that people need to hear messages that if things look bad, it doesn't just mean we're heading toward doom and destruction. It means, and this is really a gross oversimplification, no doubt, but for the short term, for this situation here, it's connected to things like the prophecy of the eagle and the condor that Belinda was talking about, or the hundreds of thousands of years accumulated karma that Chris is talking about coming to a head now. It's related to that. It's all about that notion that we've come to this point, and if we don't have something that shows us a potential for the light to come through, it's going to be much, much harder on people's psyches, So I think that is, maybe I'm an idealist, I'm a dreamer, I'm a visioner in that sense. I think we've been given this, I don't just think it, I sense that we've been given this absolutely incredible gift of life on this planet, to wake up to our true interwoven, embedded interrelationship and connection to everything, and to appreciate it and to love it and to create within it, in this short time that each of us has on the planet. My old Buddhist teacher, Chogyam Trungpa, talked about learning to appreciate the redness of red and the blueness of blue, just that really simple, like, in a sense, surrendering or opening oneself into things as they are and relaxing into that, right? We just need, I think, more and more clear, plausible, actionable information and messages that there is this potential for the birth of individual and collective awakening. So I guess that's one way of talking about, whatever this transition is, that it's no longer sustainable to keep being in the state of spiritual disconnection.
I completely understand and agree with what you're saying there, because there's so much going on in the world right now that we need these tools more than ever. So Belinda, I'm really curious about your take of what you see from your role in the world as an Indigenous woman, and what you see as being the biggest transition that we are facing as global humanity.
Right. Thank you so much for that question. I was looking at rereading Chris's chapter and then some of the things that Stephen had talked about, but I look at things in a different way, because I think what's happening to us in many Indigenous cultures around the globe, our elders have told us that these are just cycles that we're going through. Everything is evolving to that. And that's the way that I look at things. And so these things that may appear as challenges to us can really turn out to be gifts in the end. And it's really up to us as a human species to really think, not so much be in our mind, but think with our hearts. And I think there's been already too much thinking up here. That's why we're in a situation that we are in right now. And where we really need to start moving into is into the mind of the heart. And, in my book, I share a little story about an elder that told us the longest journey that we will ever travel is between our mind and our heart. And that's only 18 inches away, And so I think that that's kind of some of the things that are coming up for me. I'm reminded of many stories that even my grandparents and great-grandparents shared, and that were passed down through our oral traditions about how things evolve, and the way that we look at and perceive things is really what we create. And so, I think one of the things that I see for myself is that the children that are being born in this time, they're very, I think Chris calls it the diamond. In his book makes reference to a diamond. And I think of these children as very wise souls that are coming in right now. They already have this knowing that is within them to carry on a lot of these teachings and cultures and traditions that we all have forgotten about, because we've kind of been too focused on the materialistic aspects of our lives, and we've forgotten everything else. And so I think, I'm a little bit more optimistic that it's just an evolution and a change and a shift that we are going through as humanity. There will definitely be those that will, I think, falter off on another path. I think one of the things I'm also reminded of in part of the chapter that Chris writes, that reminds me of, is that there are these different things that are evolving, and psychedelics, these sacred plant medicines, allows us to go into these places that are different timelines than this physical timeline that we are in. And we all have our own interpretation of what that is. I've seen the future. I've seen the instruments for healing that have been shared by our star relatives. In my cultures, they said that we are star beings. We are from the stars. Our ancestors are from the stars, and we were remembering those things. But I've also seen the ancient runes and the dwellings crafted on side of the walls in many of my my journeys, and being able to travel into time frames. It's very hard to describe these timelines that you're able to tap into, to have those connections with, deceased relatives, and really, heal those relationships that we have with one another so that we can continue to evolve. I think some of that is related to some of the things that Chris talks about, is about this evolution of karma. And so one of the things that I think that, and my prayer is that as each one of us sees what's happening and unfolding around us in the world, whether it's geopolitical or climate related, really start to begin to ask ourselves, what part of that do I own? I think there's always this tendency to say that's somebody else's issue, but we all have, if we really truly believe that we are interrelated with one another, then we need to take ownership of that. That's really where the real action happens. So thank you for that question.
No,
Nice.
absolutely my pleasure. And, I think I love what you said, and I've heard it before, that the longest journey we'll ever take is the one from our head to our heart. And I repeat that back because I think it's really important, and I want everyone to, really think about that for a moment and really recognize, like, are you living from up here? It's another quote that I have in my world. It's like, when you're in your head, you're dead. When you're in your heart, you're smart. And it's just one of those things that when you drop into your heart, all of a sudden answers come, undammed and flow really well. So thank you for.
I might borrow that, Mark, by the way.
Hey, by all means. Yeah, absolutely.
Lots of trading going on here.
There you go. There you go.
Well, this is one of the ways that psychedelics are helping change the world, right? We learn, we support, we get inspired by each other, and then we can go share what we're doing, and all based on the topic of psychedelics. Anyways, Chris, again, that would be our question for you. What is the transition you see that we are facing as a society today?
Well, I only have limited visionary shamanic kind of experience of the future. When I want to turn to specifics, I have to go to the same sources that we all do. I have to go to the scientists. I have to go to the ecologists. I was very glad, Stephen, that you mentioned the work of Dwayne Elgin, because he's been crunching the numbers for decades. He's been really tracking the scientific literature. And it seems clear, if we do that, we are entering a period of enormous suffering. It is hard to overestimate how much suffering is coming in the decades ahead, between now and just say 50 years from now, 2070, 2075. When we look at the melting of the ice caps, when we look at the expanding population, when we look at climate destabilization of agriculture, likelihood of more pandemics. I mean, realistically, we could be looking at the death of 1/3 to 1/2 of the human population of this planet. If our carrying capacity is somewhere around 2 billion, and we're pushing 8 billion now, then the suffering of so many of our children and grandchildren around the world dying is just going to be an unspeakable agony that's going to bring us to our knees and give us a kind of intense incentive, a motivation to do things, to insist on changes that right now we do not have the political and social will to do. Some do, a few do, a growing number of some do, but not enough to make these shifts happen. So I think we're coming into a pain of terrible, terrible suffering. I wish it weren't so. I wish we could avoid it by having enough people come to their senses quickly enough, but I think we're past the point in history where we could avert this crisis that is coming. We might be able to soften it a touch, but it's coming and it's going to hit us. It's going to hit our children and our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren very, very hard. Now, my visionary experience is that this global crisis that we are entering is a birth process. that it is going to be horrendously painful, but it is not an apocalypse in the sense of a destruction of everything that has come up to this point in time. It is in a sense like a near-death experience where we come very close to death, and in that process of coming close to death, we break through into different orders of consciousness. I think, and this is not something human beings are doing or human beings are in control of. Nature is in control of this process. Nature is driving this evolutionary crisis. This intelligence behind nature is driving this process. The best we can do is be responsive in communion with this intelligence, responsive with this intelligence, and cooperate with it in order to facilitate a transition that it is not ours to have designed, but nature has designed this transition. Now, the way I understand the long scale of this is from within a reincarnational perspective. And from that perspective, the human beings who are entering this crisis are not human beings the way we ordinarily think of them. They're not 100-year-old beings. They're tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of year-old beings. They have layers and layers and layers of a history inside of each one of us. And this history comes from different cultures and different places around the world and different places in society, different colors, different religious traditions. All these aspects of our global complex picture are all woven into the fiber of our being. We have been growing for hundreds of thousands of years as souls, making some progress here, maybe making some step backwards there, but overall we've been growing. But collectively, the psychological level of our collective maturation is still basically egoic. It's still rooted in our individual consciousness. And the world that is falling apart around our ears is a world that was built by ego. And I don't disparage ego. Ego is beautiful. I mean, it's an extraordinarily beautiful phenomenon, but it is still fundamentally cut off from the deeper fabric of life, from the deeper fabric of our interconnectedness, from the deeper fabric of our spiritual connectedness. And basically, because of its limited awareness, it designs a world which works for some and doesn't work for others. It elevates the condition of life for some at the cost of disparaging the quality of life of other beings. And we know how this happens, we know how this works, we know what's been happening. And basically, this is a world that works for some and doesn't work for others. And it's a world, the limitations of this view are basically leading to a global destruction, a global catastrophe of unmitigated suffering. I don't think we can survive as a species living out of the level of consciousness that we have been living out of up to this point in time. For all its beauty, the ego is still too small a consciousness to basically solve the global problems, to solve the social problems that are becoming paramount right now. We will either grow up or we're going to die. And that makes this death process a tremendously powerful evolutionary accelerator. Now, what growing up means, I think, is shifting from an egoic perspective to a soul perspective. Basically, I think we are in a time when all of our former lives and all of this history and all of this work that each one of us has been doing and collectively we've been doing, I think what's happening is just as the world is coming together as one, our psyches are coming together as one. The prophecies that Belinda refers to as East-West culture, North-South culture, but the psyche is coming together as one. And when we reach critical mass, not only will the world give birth to a new culture, but the core of this culture, I think, is that it will be operating out of a different level of consciousness, out of a higher level of consciousness. And I think the most immediate way of understanding this is out of soul consciousness. And this is what, in my visions, comes through as the birth of the diamond soul, which is simply all of our history integrated into a single consciousness, which is transparent to each other at a very deep level and transparent to the divine at a very deep level. And once we collectively make this transition, it's not going to work if only a few people here or there make this transition. Nature doesn't think small. Nature only thinks in large, large movements. The entire species is being taken through this transition. And I don't know how we're going to make this transition. I don't know whether it's going to come slowly or fast or how we're going to do it. But the visions which have been poured into me in my years of psychedelic work is that we do make this transition. We do come out of this crisis a different kind of species, not only improved a little bit around the edges, but with a fundamental change taking place at the very core of the collective unconscious, so that every human being born after this transition takes place is operating out of a different foundation of consciousness, a different, more spiritually informed form of consciousness. And just as any mother, when she goes into labor, is in a day filled with pain, but at the end of the day, when she gives birth to her child, that pain is worth it because of the beauty of the child that's being born. I think it will be that way for us too. We are giving birth to a new form of humanity, a more enlightened form, a more compassionate form, a more spiritually awakened form of humanity, historically unprecedented. And as this transition takes place, we will look back at this century of crisis and we will say, it was worth it. To give birth to something so beautiful, it was worth it.
Mark, can I
Yes.
add
Yes.
a little icing on that cake?
Absolutely, you can, Stephen.
Thanks. Well, that was incredible, Chris, by the way. Mind-blowing, really. And I'd just like to throw in one of my favorite sayings: necessity is the mother of invention. And I think that the intelligence, I'm sure the intelligence capabilities of humanity, often, as you've just implied, I think, Chris, in concert with each other, are all but limitless. And so, from my point of view, the optimistic side of this, what you're talking about, Chris, is a potentially extremely difficult, painful period of dissolution before there's enough of a gap for the new vision to come in, is going to be in some way tempered by increasing intelligence. It's like life is getting real on the planet, and as things get real, our deeper capabilities start to come out more and more. So I think that's really important to understand, frankly, and goes along with what I was saying earlier about the need for sort of plausible, understandable, actionable visions and messages for people, so that as many people as possible don't just fall into despair and hopelessness as material conditions deteriorate, if that's what's going to happen. So yeah, I just wanted to add that let us not underestimate, and I'm not saying this in contradiction to anything you've said, Chris, but let us not underestimate the it's almost unlimited potential for creativity that is going to become increasingly needed as time goes on, and will come out, as we move out of the sort of the Hermann Hesse's last book, The Glass Bead Game, Magister Ludi, takes place about 500 years in the future, and he refers back to, or those people refer back to this time as the age of feuilleton, and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it means paper, like it's like plastic or insubstantial or something. So there's a kind of a frivolousness that dominates those parts of the world that can afford to be frivolous at this time, which I think is likely to crumble, and more people are going to get real. I don't want to ramble too long, but I just want to say, as a music person myself, music has been treated in such shabby ways in recent history, and I think it's going to play an important role in the future as this reality process or this reality kind of trajectory deepens, and people will start to increasingly discover that there's incredible potential in music that a lot of people already know, but a lot of people have no idea because of the fact that it's, oftentimes people put it on, they don't even barely listen to it, or it's piped into elevators and grocery stores and all that, and just treat it as a kind of a cheapo commodity to influence the mood of a situation, buy more or whatever. We certainly know that with songs like the Peyote Prayer songs and their capability, and the Icaros of the ayahuasca world and their capability and such. Enough from me.
Thanks for adding that in, Stephen. And Chris, you said something that I thought was so beautifully said. And it was really the metaphor of a mother giving birth, and that pain that turns into great pleasure, right? Mm-hmm. And it just reminded me of something that it's one thing I always live by, and we see great change coming, and one of our ways of dealing with change is a lot of people resist change, and I want to encourage everybody to embrace the change, because change is automatic. Growth, not necessarily. But when change can happen and we can grow and help others grow and transform through the pain, air quoting, the pain of change, versus the ability to embrace it as an opportunity, because it's gonna suck, it's gonna hurt. It happens when change is happening. Metamorphosis, I gotta believe, isn't always isn't painless to the caterpillar in that sense. And that if we do anything when the change comes, let's embrace the change and grow with it. Based on some of the things that we've been talking about here. And Belinda, I just want to touch in with you. Is there something you wanted to add to what Chris and Stephen may have said there?
Yes, I think one of the things that's really important to me, and one of the things that I continue to see in this space, is that we forget about the importance of spirituality in this space, either because we don't understand it, and especially in circles of science. It's very difficult for them to talk about that when we're talking about healing. For many indigenous cultures, spirituality is actually the number one component that actually helps to bring healing and wholeness to an individual. So I think that's one of the things I also wanted to add, and as we start to move forward in this movement, that we be mindful of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really goes hand in hand with our disconnection to nature, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if I could add a footnote to what Stephen had said, I think in my visionary experience, one of the messages that's come through over and over and over again is the pace of the past is irrelevant to the pace of the future. These things are going to happen much faster than we could possibly imagine, much faster, faster, faster. And one of the ways it was unfolded for me is a vision of the entire collective psyche, the species mind that underlies all of our individual minds, is a unified field. And then under the pressure of this time in history, this field is going to become hyperstimulated. Through all the angst and all the suffering and all the uncertainty, it's going to become hyperstimulated. And when it becomes hyperstimulated, it'll begin to function in what chaos thinkers would call a nonlinear system. It'll become a nonlinear system, or a far from equilibrium system. Nonlinear systems are capable of doing things that linear systems cannot do. And one of the things they can do is change rapidly, change quickly. Small fluctuations of input can produce dramatic outputs. The butterfly flaps its wings in China can produce a hurricane across the world. So that means that under the pressure of the future, the contribution of individuals, the influence of individuals will not be diminishing, it'll be increasing, so that individuals can affect the outcome of this evolutionary transition more in the future than they were in the past. And it's just through this and through many other ways, the speed with which things can change, the creativity, and when nonlinear systems evoke from deeper within its nature, latent forms of creativity that are part of the natural fabric, but had not been actualized up to that point in time. So I think Stephen's absolutely right. The creativity of the universe is going to be manifesting the collectivity, the interconnectivity of our beings, of our hearts, and of our minds. I think we're entering into the time, one of the ways of thinking about where we're coming into is we're entering into the period of the one heart, where humanity will experience the one heart. And once we know the one heart in our essence, then we won't hurt each other. We won't satisfy, we won't let anybody be diminished in their opportunities of life. And I think we are awakening into the one heart. And I think, Belinda, you're talking about making the journey from mind to heart is a very powerful mentioning of this.
May I, Mark?
You may, Stephen.
Thank you. Oh, Chris, another beautiful statement. Thanks so much. Yeah, I want to add in another thing on the sort of optimism side, you might say. Excuse me. And this is another one of those little aphorisms which has come to me in a variety of ways. But this particular aphorism is there. I think it's Victor Hugo said that there is nothing as powerful as an idea whose time has come. And Canucus Littlefish, a roadman from the Native American Church that I sat up in meetings with perhaps 24 times or more over a 12-year period. Others have said this too, probably many actually, but what Ken said to me one time, or Canucus said to me one time, was that he and some others had been having a vision that as the stability or believability, plausibility of the current spiritually disconnected, as Chris says, egoic dominated system becomes less and less plausible, less and less viable, then that will create a gap. That is creating a gap, but the gap will widen or become big enough for this new vision to come in, and that new vision will make sense. You know, as Terence McKenna, who I think borrowed this from William Blake or somebody ultimately and reworded it for modern times, was if the truth can be told so as to be understood, it will be believed, which is essentially what Dwayne is saying, Elgin is saying in his chapter as well. So I think it's, again, from the sort of like giving people hope perspective, it's important to realize again that we're not just looking at destruction, it's the birth, it's the death, rebirth part of it, right? That's so important. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for adding on to that, Stephen. Now, we are getting near a time. We want to be mindful because sometimes people don't like the long episodes of things. So if there's one thing I like to do is I always like to give people something tangible or a call to action. And I know we've talked about a lot of great ideas and things that people can do, but I'd like to ask each of you specifically that if there was one thing someone can do to help this transition along for humanity as a call to action as an individual, what would you suggest or think that might be the most, bear the most fruit? What do you think the most important action for all of us to do is moving forward? And
Well,
whoever wants to go first, go
I'll
ahead.
go
Steve.
first. I'm going to quote Canucus Littlefish again, who said to us in the teepee a couple of times, relatives, stay behind the medicine. So it's a metaphor, essentially. Stephen Herod Buhner, in his book Plant Intelligence and the Imaginal Realm, uses the phrase following the golden thread, which you and I have been having fun with the last couple of years, Mark. So that's the getting in front of the medicine as in reality, but also as a metaphor, is the ego getting in the way and enforcing its agenda and its needs onto the situation. Staying behind the medicine, as I understand it, has to do with quieting the mind, calming the mind, humbling oneself, dropping down into the heart, as people have said so beautifully, Belinda and Chris today, dropping down into the heart and experiencing through that way, and just following the golden thread. I think it's a very optimistic, in a sense, way of looking at our potential. So, or to put it in a more sort of a fun way, excuse me, the wonderful novelist Tom Robbins, in his book Fierce Invalids Home from Hot Climates, told a story about a friend of his who had like a parakeet or some large, bird that was the first thing any visitor to the place always saw when the person walked in the door. Here's this thing sitting on a stand, and it said to everybody, the parrot's name was Sailor, by the way, Sailor the parrot, and everyone who came in through the store, it said, "People of the world, relax." So if there's one sort of simple message, it's like relax, pay attention, and trust, and stay behind the medicine. And then I think, at least I'd like to believe that things unfold in and of themselves, and we then know the next intelligent, skillful step to take. Marc, before we go, is one of us going to say something about the book launch? Oh,
we're not there yet.
Okay. Didn't mean to jump the gun.
Always jumping the gun.
I didn't know if this was my last time to say anything for the day or not.
It's never your last time.
Oh, yes, it is.
Always just one more thing.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway,
that's Stephen. That's fantastic. I completely can relate to what you're saying. And Belinda, what do you think? If people were to do one thing, leave here from this conversation and do one thing that can make a difference in this world, what is that to be?
Thank you for that question, Marc. One of the things at the very end of my chapter, I end with a prayer for healing of humanity. And I think one of the best things that we each can do is look internal to ourselves and do the work that we are being called to. Because with that, then it resonates out into our families, our communities, and then globally, just like, Chris had talked a little bit about. It's just like that pebble in the pond. To really get out there and do something, get involved, look for, practice sacred activism. Look for those opportunities where you can help your neighbors, you can help your community. I think with all of that said and done, it helps for us to evolve into a better place.
Very well said. And I like that you talked about, that the contribution and volunteerism, because I think that that's just a powerful way that people can get outside of themselves and, serve the greater good. So thank you for bringing that to the surface, Belinda. I think it's really important. And Chris, you're up.
All right. Well, in addition to doing our inner work that Belinda referred to and addressing the shadow and taking responsibility for our own shadow, I'd like to sort of broaden the perspective now. I think Stephen's right that music is going to play a very important role in the time that we're coming into, and not just musicians, but artists, politicians, scientists, it's going to take all of us working in concert to bring about this social transformation and this to help us make this shift. So I would just invite us to remember that before we were born and before our children were born, every one of us knew what we were getting into before we were born. We all made a conscious choice to be born in this time and to this place, in this particular form, in this particular sex, in this particular culture. We were born and we chose to become an active participant in this historical process. And no matter what I might recommend in terms of the good thing for someone to do, or a core thing for someone to do, inevitably I would reflect my own limitations of my own spot in the world. And I think what's important is for each one of us to remember that we have already buried around us all the help that we need, all the information we need, all the resources that we need to do our particular piece in contributing to this transformation that we are a part of. The question is not, what do we need to do? The question is, I think, will we have the courage to do what is ours to do? We will know what is ours to do. Will we have the courage to do it? If everybody has the courage to do their particular part, then we're going to make it through this thing.
I really like that courage to push through that, Chris. I think it's, so spot on, as so many people kind of stand on the sidelines, never playing the game. They're just watching it, right? And I think it's really important. And if there's one thing I wanted to add in terms of just a call to action from my perspective, and I think about a conversation I had with Donnie Blakey, who I know Stephen knows quite well. I don't know, Belinda, if you knew Donnie before he passed, but he was just a brilliant guy. And he said something to me, and without the huge story of where he, what it was, but the most important thing he says was, it was about having others, having your best interest at heart, not our interests, kind of like what Stephen was saying about being behind the medicine, and put other people's best interests in your heart as well, not what you can get out of them or do, and really respect, appreciate, understand the other person's world, because so many people are going through, trials and tribulations of life right now. And what we need is more understanding, compassion, non-judgment, where we can actually put other people's best interest at heart and not our own. And I think that, that has a huge potential to change the way people interact in this world and where they're at. So, that's really, you don't know where other people are at. So who are we to, judge, complain, criticize, condemn, any of those things? And when we step back in a position of love, acceptance, appreciation of where we are all at on our journey, it can really make a difference, because I know there's people out there that don't hear kind words very often, and we have the ability to impact people with our words and our actions. So,
And I think Mark, you meant understanding, not understanding.
yes, thank you, Belinda. Yes, I did. That's a good one. I'm gonna have to get used to using that one, because it's super powerful. Well, I want to thank you, all three of you, for being part of our conversation today. It's always an honor. I learn so much, and I get inspired as well. And I know that Stephen's book is out. It's available, and we're actually having a book launch here at St. James Hall in Vancouver. So maybe, Stephen, you can talk a little bit about that. We're pretty excited. We're getting close.
Sure. So anyone who can walk, drive, bicycle, train, boat, or fly to Vancouver, we'd love to have you with us on the evening of April 7th, which is, by the way, we didn't know this when we set this date with St. James Hall, but it happens to be Good Friday, which is an interesting coincidence, you might say, or perhaps synchronicity. So at the very least, it's going to be a small g Good Friday, Good Friday. Excuse me. And we've been, Mark, you and I have been talking about it. Not book launch almost sounds a little bit, I don't know, academic or library like, or dry or something like that. But really, we're painting it as an empowering celebration that in my highest idealized vision of what this could be, we bring people together. We don't talk a lot. Dennis McKenna has volunteered to come in and say a few words. I've been trying to talk Belinda into coming up, but it's a long way, and she's got other things to do. I'd love to have some more of the contributors around, but they're all far flung. So Dennis is our more local person who's consented. But we're not going to talk long, and then we're going to go directly into one of our frequently done in the past cannabis-friendly. Well, call it a cannabis ceremony, but we like to call it a cannabis-friendly ceremony, because you're certainly not required to, imbibe any cannabis, and the ceremony itself will be equally, maybe not equally, but quite decently powerful and effective as a meditation ceremony, whether you imbibe any cannabis or not. And then we will follow that. Well, I'll hang out in a corner and sign some books if people want me to. But other than that, our wonderful world musician Shine Edgar and his incredibly talented multi-instrumental percussionist Curtis Andrews are going to do an hour or so of dance music, which, it's almost impossible not to dance to the Shine's music. You really have to be stuck in your chair to get to not want to dance to Shine. So what I'm hoping to do cannabis in that way, and we haven't talked about cannabis as part of this discussion particularly, but if we had more time in another context, I would want to talk about how cannabis has an important role to play in all this because of its sort of gentle ubiquity, and when understood properly, it can be considered the sacrament of peace. But it allows people to have visions and deepening of experience in a way that's quite functional in a situation like 150 people at St. James Hall. You don't want to be handing out 2 dried grams of mushrooms to 150 people in that kind of circumstance, right? But cannabis you can do quite safely, especially with the kind of guidance that we give them in the container that we hold for them. So my vision, my hope is that is an empowering thing as well as a celebratory thing. So we highly and strongly encourage people to come and join us for that. So there's Mark, do you want to talk about how they can get info and details?
Absolutely, but I just want to add to that is like Shine and Curtis are incredible. And I know Chris Bache, you know that. And
Right.
Belinda, if you were there on Saturday night at the conference, you missed out on a special treat. I'll get you some music for it there. But oh my God, incredible experience. So just grateful for that. And yeah, you can get, if you go to spiritplantmedicine.com/events, you'll see a link there where you can get register your tickets. Got all sorts of information. There's a couple of little videos and music you can sample on. And right now until April, what is it? It's 14th.
March 17th till March 17th.
March 17th, we're offering a 30% discount for anybody who wants to join us an early bird ticket. And that's going for another few days. So if you're watching live or after the fact, now's the time to save on that. And we look forward to really having a great evening of, community, connection, ceremony, some medicine for those who are interested, and of course, some epic music and dance with Curtis and Shine. It's just really incredible. So if there's any last words anybody would like to share before we wrap it up, because I'm going to play a little video of the event that's a minute as we close off. But Belinda and Chris, if there's anything you'd like to add, we'd love to just have you send us off.
Thank you. Thank you for this conversation. It's been really beautiful. Thank you.
Likewise, thank you. And Stephen, thank you for your vision to bring together all the voices that you brought together in the book, and for everything that you do and you and Mark do to facilitate community around the awakening of our time in history. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, and I would like to thank, Mark for, Mark, for you being so supportive of all this, for one thing, and Belinda and Chris for being so generous and giving your time for this as well. And really, I'm not exaggerating. Both of you, the things that you have said today, have just really touched me. They've been really brilliant. So thanks a lot for that.
And thank you for your kind words, everyone. And Stephen, it's just one way of me just sharing the message. I'm all about how do we transform our lives? What are the tools? What works? And the medicine brought me to this. And so I'm just here to help, these great visionary and Indigenous voices speak out. It's what I want to be part of supporting for a change in the world. And this is one of the vehicles that I believe is very powerful to do that. So I'm just honored to be able to share space, share time, and help everybody share their message. So thank you so much. Mm-hmm. And with that being said, I'm going to play a little video here as we sign off, just a little bit about the event and what's going on, and you'll get to sample a little bit of music. So here we go. Thanks again, everyone.
Please do not underestimate how deep we can go individually and collectively with this. And I say that from experience.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us. That's just a little teaser and a taste. But if you go to the website and take a look, there's a 10-minute version of that whole soundtrack that Shine and Curtis were playing that you can go enjoy, because it's really quite epic. So thanks again, everyone. Until next time.